In 1953, I watched nuclear fire give birth to something that wasn't human, and it's been watching us ever since. I am Staff Sergeant Michael Torres. I was 22 years old when the U.S. military ordered me to march toward a live atomic bomb in the Nevada desert. They called it Operation Desert Rock. I call it the day humanity opened a door that should have stayed locked forever. The night before the test, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes briefed us in a canvas tent that reeked of diesel and fear. Gentlemen, at 0600 hours, we detonate a nuclear device 7 miles from your position. Your mission is to advance toward ground zero after the blast and prove American soldiers can fight in a nuclear environment. Private First Class Danny Romano raised a trembling hand. Sir, how close do we get? Hayes didn't blink. Close enough. I'd survived Korea, watched good men die screaming in frozen mud. But lying in my sleeping bag that night, something felt different. The desert air hummed with electricity that made my dog tags vibrate against my chest like tuning forks. Corporal Jenkins, a Pacific Theater veteran, whispered from the next bunk, "Torres, you feel that? Like something's watching us that ain't supposed to exist?" Dawn came blood red over the Nevada wasteland. They lined us up in trenches 8,000 yards from a skeletal tower where the bomb hung like a metallic cocoon waiting to hatch hell itself. Scientists with Geiger counters kept their distance, clicking measurements while staying far enough away to survive what they were about to unleash on us. Goggles down, Hayes commanded through crackling radio static. Do not look directly at the flash. The countdown began. 10. My hands shook uncontrollably. 9, 8, 7. The desert held its breath. 6, 5, 4. Every instinct screamed to run. 3, 2, 1. The world exploded into light that burned through closed eyelids. And welding goggles. This wasn't illumination. This was creation torn open and bleeding pure energy across the atomic level. Heat hit like a furnace blast, turning saliva to dust and making skin feel like it was peeling away in sheets. The shockwave arrived 30 seconds later, lifting grown men off their feet and slamming us into radioactive earth that would glow for decades. But here's what the official reports never mentioned, what they classified and buried and denied ever happened. When we opened our eyes, something was moving inside that atomic fire. Shapes that danced in nuclear flames like they were born from split atoms and gamma radiation. Tall figures that walked upright but moved wrong, like their joints bent in places human anatomy doesn't allow. They saw us watching, and they smiled with faces made of concentrated light. What would you do if you saw life emerge from an atomic explosion? Tell me in the comments below. The mushroom cloud rose like a pillar of judgment against the Nevada sky. 15 minutes after detonation, Major William Cross gave the order we'd been dreading. Advance toward ground zero. Stay in formation. Document everything you see. My squad leader, Sergeant First Class Robert Kim, led our platoon forward. The Geiger counter in his pack clicked faster with every step. Sand had turned to glass beneath our boots, crunching like broken bottles. The air tasted of copper pennies and something else. Something organic and wrong. Private Romano stumbled beside me, his face pale green beneath his helmet. "Sarge, I don't feel right. My teeth are tingling." "Stay focused, Romano," Kim barked. But I could see sweat streaming down his neck despite the desert chill. 2 miles from ground zero, Corporal Jenkins stopped walking. He pulled off his helmet and stared at his hands. Jesus Christ, look at this. His palms were glowing. Not bright, but a faint phosphorescent shimmer that pulsed with his heartbeat. Within an hour, half the company was showing the same effect. Our dog tags, our weapons, even our cigarettes gave off that ghostly light. Captain Ernest Mitchell ordered us to set up observation posts. We dug foxholes in radioactive sand, while officers in clean uniforms took photographs from 100 yards away. They never got close enough to glow. That's when the hallucinations started. Private First Class Tommy Valdez was the first to report it. He claimed he saw figures moving through the residual smoke clouds. Tall, thin shapes that walked upright but moved wrong, like their joints bent in places human joints don't bend. "There's someone out there," Valdez whispered, pointing toward the blast crater. "They're watching us." Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh, our medical officer, checked his pupils with a flashlight. Radiation exposure can cause visual disturbances. Stay hydrated. But then Jenkins saw them too. Then Romano. Then me. They stood at the edge of vision, always in your peripheral sight. The moment you turned to look directly, they vanished like smoke. But you could feel them studying you, learning from you, measuring your fear with an intelligence that felt ancient and hungry. By nightfall, 12 men reported hearing voices. Not human voices. Something that sounded like static trying to form words, like radio signals bouncing off the ionosphere and coming back changed. The voices knew our names. I was pulling guard duty when I heard it clearly for the first time. A whisper that seemed to come from inside my own skull. Michael Torres, Staff Sergeant. Serial number 518472263. My blood turned to ice water. I'd never told anyone my serial number. It wasn't on my uniform or dog tags. But somehow, something in that radioactive wasteland knew exactly who I was. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Cole approached my position, his face grim in the starlight. "You hearing it too, Torres?" I nodded. "How's it know our numbers?" Cole lit a cigarette with shaking hands. Maybe it read our minds when the bomb went off. Maybe it crawled out of whatever hell we just opened up. The Geiger counter in my pack had been clicking steadily all day, but now it was making a different sound. A rhythmic pattern, like Morse code. 3 days after the blast, we knew something was wrong with Private Romano, that he hadn't slept since the detonation. Didn't seem to need it. While the rest of us struggled with nausea and fatigue, Danny sat perfectly still for hours, staring at the horizon with eyes that never blinked. "Romano's lost his damn mind," whispered Corporal Eddie Martinez during chow. "Caught him talking to himself last night." Except he was answering back in a different voice that I'd noticed it too. The kid who used to joke about everything had gone silent. When he did speak, his words came out flat and precise, like he was reading from a script written by someone else. Master Sergeant Frank Abdullah gathered the squad leaders for a briefing in the command tent. The canvas walls glowed faintly from our contaminated gear, casting everything in sickly green light. "We've got 17 men showing psychological anomalies," Abdullah reported, consulting a clipboard that left radioactive fingerprints on the paper. "Dr. Walsh wants to evacuate them to Nellis Air Force Base for observation." Lieutenant Colonel Hayes shook his head. "Negative. This exercise continues until completion. Document the symptoms. Classify everything above secret." That's when Sergeant Kim spoke up. Kim was a veteran of Normandy and Iwo Jima. If anyone understood the cost of following orders, it was him. "Sir, with respect, these men aren't just acting strange. They're acting like they're not entirely human anymore." Hayes' face darkened. "Explain." "Romano predicted yesterday's supply drop down to the minute. Said he could feel the aircraft approaching. Martinez claims he can understand what the test animals are thinking. And Thompson." Kim paused, swallowing hard. "Thompson touched a Geiger counter that wasn't working, and it started functioning again." I watched Hayes process this information. The man had probably seen every type of combat stress reaction in the book, but this was something new, something that didn't fit in any manual. That night, I found Romano standing guard at the perimeter. He was facing away from camp, toward the blast crater that still glowed like a wound in the earth. "Danny," I called softly. "You okay, kid?" When he turned around, his eyes reflected light like an animal's. "I can see them now, Sergeant Torres. The ones who were here before us. Before the bomb. Before everything." My skin crawled. "Who was here?" "The Watchers. They've been sleeping under the desert for a long time. The atomic fire woke them up." Romano's voice was still his own, but the inflection was wrong, like someone else was using his vocal cords. "They're grateful we opened the door." Behind him, something moved in the darkness beyond the fence line. Tall, impossibly thin, walking with a gait that hurt to watch. "They want to go home with us," Romano continued, his glowing eyes never leaving mine. "Back to the world. Back to the cities full of people who don't know what's coming." I reached for my sidearm, though. I wasn't sure what I planned to shoot. "Romano, step away from the fence." He smiled then. It was Danny's face, Danny's teeth, but the expression belonged to something that had never been human. "It's too late, Sergeant. We're already inside." The Geiger counter on my belt began clicking in that same rhythmic pattern. Morse code. And this time, I understood what it was spelling. WELCOMEHOME. 6 months after Operation Desert Rock, I was transferred to Fort Carson, Colorado. Orders came down without explanation. No debriefing, no medical follow-up, just a new assignment and a security clearance upgrade that came with very specific instructions about what I could and couldn't discuss. The nightmare started immediately. Every night, I dreamed of the Nevada desert. But in these dreams, the atomic blast never ended. The mushroom cloud kept growing, spreading across the continent like a living thing, carrying whispers and languages that predated human speech that I tried talking to the VA. Dr. Patricia Hoffman listened patiently as I described the glowing skin, the voices, the way some of the men had changed after exposure. She prescribed sleeping pills and suggested I was suffering from delayed stress reaction. Sergeant Torres, she said, reviewing my file. According to these records, you were never at the Nevada test site. Operation Desert Rock was conducted with volunteer personnel only. Your unit was stationed in Wyoming during that period. I stared at her. Ma'am, that's not possible. I have photographs, radiation burns, my Geiger counter readings. There are no Geiger counter readings in your file. She showed me the paperwork. My service record had been scrubbed clean. No mention of nuclear testing. No radiation exposure documentation. Even my medical records from the weeks following the blast had vanished. That night, I called Corporal Martinez from a payphone outside the base. His wife answered, voice strained with worry. Eddie's been acting strange since he got back, she whispered. He stands in the backyard for hours, staring at the sky. Yesterday, I caught him talking to our neighbor's dog. Swear to God, the dog was talking back. I tracked down 3 other veterans from Desert Rock. Same story every time. Official records denied their participation. Families reported bizarre behavior. Men who used to be normal were developing abilities that shouldn't exist. Private Romanos. Mother wrote to me from Chicago. Her letter arrived in an envelope that glowed faintly under fluorescent lights. Danny came home different, she wrote. He knows things he shouldn't know. When the phone rings, he answers it before it completes the first ring and starts talking to whoever's calling like he's been expecting them. Last week, he fixed our broken radio just by touching it. The repairman said the circuits had been completely fried, but somehow they work now. I don't think my son is entirely my son anymore. I decided to investigate further. Using connections from my Army intelligence days, I accessed classified files through a contact at the Pentagon. What I found made my blood run cold. Operation Desert Rock wasn't just about testing soldier resilience to nuclear warfare. Hidden in subsection 7C of the classified appendix was a different objective: assessment of human adaptability to exotic energy exposure and documentation of resulting physiological anomalies. They knew something would happen to us. The glowing skin, the enhanced senses, the way some men seemed to attract electromagnetic fields. It was all expected. We weren't soldiers being tested. We were test subjects being conditioned. But there was more. Deep in the archives, I found a reference to earlier experiments. Project Starfish, 1947. Project Nightfall, 1949. Each involved exposing military personnel to unconventional phenomena and monitoring the results. Each had been terminated when the subjects began exhibiting characteristics incompatible with baseline human psychology. The final entry in Romano's file was a single line: subject transferred to Facility 7 for extended observation. Recommend permanent containment. 30 years later, I returned to Nevada. The official tourist maps don't show the exact location of the Desert Rock tests. The government converted most of the area into wilderness preserve, claiming environmental restoration. But I remembered the landmarks, the twisted Joshua tree that survived the blast, the rock formation that looked like a skull when viewed from the south. I wasn't alone. 6 other veterans had made the same pilgrimage, drawn by dreams that wouldn't stop and questions that demanded answers. Master Sergeant Frank Abdullah had driven from Phoenix. Corporal Kim flew in from Seattle. Even Martinez came, despite his wife's protest, that we met at a truck stop in Mercury, Nevada. 60-year-old men with gray hair and government pensions, trying to make sense of something that happened when we were young and trusting. Still having the dreams? Abdullah asked over coffee that tasted like diesel fuel. That we all nodded. Same dream, every night for 3 decades. Walking through atomic fire towards something that waited in the light. Something that had been waiting much longer than humanity had existed. Martinez pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. I hired a private investigator. Took him 2 years, but he tracked down what happened to the others. The list made for grim reading. Of the 47 men exposed during Desert Rock, 16 had died in car accidents within 5 years of the test. 12 had committed suicide. 8 had simply vanished, leaving behind families who insisted the missing men had been acting strange before they disappeared. That left 11 of us. 11 men who carried something in their blood that shouldn't be there. That we drove into the desert at sunset, following dirt roads that weren't on any map. The Geiger counter I'd brought still worked, clicking steadily as we approached the blast site. After 30 years, the area was still hot. Ground Zero had been fenced off and marked with radiation warnings in 3 languages. But the fence was old and rust had eaten holes large enough for a man to squeeze through. "This is insane," Kim muttered as we crossed the perimeter. "We're contaminating ourselves all over again." But we kept walking. Something was calling us back to this place. The same voice that had whispered our names in 1953, patient as geological time, was finally ready to explain. The blast crater was smaller than I remembered, 50 feet across, filled with sand that sparkled like crushed diamonds. In the center stood a single metal rod, about 8 feet tall, that hadn't been there during the original test. As we approached, the rod began to hum. A low frequency that I felt in my bones rather than heard with my ears. The sound triggered memories I'd suppressed for decades, standing in the atomic fire, seeing shapes that moved like liquid shadow, hearing voices that spoke without vocal cords, telling us we'd been chosen for something magnificent and terrible. "They're still here," Abdullah whispered. "Jesus Christ, they're still here." The rod's humming intensified. Around us, the air began to shimmer like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. But this was November, and the desert was cold. Then we saw them, the Watchers, the ones Romano had tried to warn us about 30 years ago. Tall figures that seemed to be made of concentrated radiation, standing at the edge of our vision like mirages that refused to fade. That they'd been waiting. Oh, this time, they'd been waiting for us to come home. The beings didn't speak with voices. They communicated through the radiation in our blood, downloading thoughts directly into our minds like data transferred between computers. That we learned the truth in fragments that burned themselves into our consciousness. They weren't aliens in the way science fiction imagined. They were something far older and far more terrifying. Entities that existed in the spaces between atoms, feeding on the energy released when matter was torn apart at the nuclear level. Humanity's first atomic bomb had been like ringing a dinner bell across the cosmos. "You opened doors that were meant to stay closed," the voice said, using Abdullah's mouth but speaking with inflections that belonged to something ancient beyond measure. "Your species split the atom without understanding what lives in the spaces you created." They showed us images then, visions projected directly into our visual cortex. We saw the moment Fat Man detonated over Nagasaki. But from their perspective, it looked different. The mushroom cloud wasn't just an explosion. It was a birthing chamber, allowing these entities to crawl from their dimensional hiding places into our reality. Every nuclear test since then had strengthened their foothold. Every power plant, every medical isotope, every atomic clock was another anchor point connecting their realm to ours. "The soldiers you selected," the voice continued, now speaking through Martinez, "were the most compatible with our frequency. We needed hosts who could survive the initial integration process." I understood now why so many of our unit had died or disappeared. They hadn't been murdered or driven insane. They'd been transformed, becoming something new that couldn't exist in regular human society. Kim tried to run. The radiation entities let him get maybe 20 yards before his nervous system seized up and he collapsed, convulsing in the radioactive sand. When he stood up, his eyes glowed with that familiar phosphorescent light. "Where's Romano?" I managed to ask, though speaking felt like trying to breathe underwater. The answer came as a flood of images. Danny Romano hadn't been taken to any government facility. He'd walked into the desert one night in 1954 and kept walking until he found a place where the boundary between dimensions was thin enough to cross. He was alive, if you could call it that, serving as an ambassador between their species and ours. "The integration is nearly complete," the voice said, now using all of our mouths simultaneously. "Your governments think they can contain what they've unleashed. They're wrong. Every nuclear facility on your planet is a potential gateway. Every atom bomb in your arsenals is an invitation for more of our kind to join us. They showed us the future they were building. Cities where humans and radiation entities shared the same space, feeding off each other in symbiotic relationships that would fundamentally change what it meant to be human. It wasn't conquest in any traditional sense. It was evolution forced, at the speed of atomic decay. You have a choice, they said. Return to your lives and pretend this never happened. Die naturally and take your knowledge to the grave. Or help us prepare humanity for what's coming. The metal rod in the crater's center began to pulse brighter, and I realized it wasn't just a marker. It was a transmitter broadcasting our location to others of their kind. Right now, beings made of pure radiation were converging on this spot from across the desert, called by signals we couldn't detect, but our contaminated bodies could feel that we had maybe 10 minutes before this place would be crawling with entities that had been waiting 70 years to make direct contact with their human hosts. The choice was simple: become willing collaborators in humanity's transformation, or die here in the sand where it all began. That if you discovered that everything you thought you knew about atomic energy was a lie, would you try to warn the world or protect yourself? Let me know what you'd choose, because the decision we made that night in Nevada is still shaping the world you live in today. That we chose silence. Not because we were cowards, though fear certainly played a role. We chose silence because the alternative was unthinkable. The radiation entities had shown us what would happen if their existence became public knowledge: panic, global nuclear disarmament that would cripple human civilization, wars fought with conventional weapons that would kill billions. And in the end, it wouldn't matter, because they were already here, woven into the quantum structure of every atom that had been split since 1945, if they let us leave the desert that night. But we carried something back with us. Not just radiation in our blood, but knowledge that sat in our minds like a time bomb waiting to detonate. Abdullah died 3 months later. Heart attack in his sleep. His widow found him in bed, glowing faintly in the dark, a peaceful smile on his face. The coroner ruled it natural causes, never mentioning the way the body seemed to emit its own light. Martinez lasted 6 months before he started sleepwalking. His wife would find him standing in their backyard at 3 a.m., staring at the sky and speaking in languages that predated human speech. One morning she woke up and he was gone, leaving behind only a faint phosphorescent outline on the sheets. Kim moved to Alaska, claiming the cold helped suppress whatever was growing inside him. His letters grew increasingly erratic before they stopped coming altogether. A Park Service ranger found his cabin empty last winter. No signs of struggle, no footprints in the snow, just a note on the table that read, "The integration is beautiful. Don't mourn for us. I'm the last one now. The only survivor of desert rock who still pretends to be entirely human. But the pretense is getting harder to maintain. I can feel them in my blood, whispering suggestions, offering improvements to my aging biology. My eyesight has grown sharper, despite my age. I haven't been sick in 15 years. Sometimes I catch myself glowing in bathroom mirrors when I think no one is looking. The worst part is the dreams. Every night, I see the future they're building. Nuclear power plants that aren't just generating electricity. They're breeding grounds for hybrid children who will inherit the Earth when pure humans are extinct. Research facilities where scientists think they're studying radiation effects, but are actually documenting the next step in human evolution of their patient. They've been waiting in the spaces between atoms for millions of years. They can wait a few more decades for humanity to fully adapt to their presence. That I've written this account 17 times, always losing the courage to make it public. Who would believe an 80-year-old veteran claiming that atomic testing was actually first contact with interdimensional parasites? I'd be dismissed as senile, suffering from radiation-induced dementia. Maybe that's for the best. But sometimes, late at night, when the phosphorescent glow from my skin is bright enough to read by, I wonder if silence is really protection or just another form of collaboration. The Nevada test site is still there, still radioactive, still broadcasting signals to entities that swim through quantum foam like sharks drawn to blood. Every nuclear power plant in the world is a potential gateway. Every medical X-ray is a tiny invitation for them to take root in human tissue. That they're not invaders anymore. They're residents. And we invited them in with the first atomic bomb we detonated in the desert 70 years ago. That if you're reading this after I'm gone, You'll find my body glowing in whatever place. I chose to die. Don't touch the remains. Don't let the government study them. Just bury me deep and mark the grave with warnings in every language you can think of. Because the radiation doesn't die with the host. It just waits for the next compatible person to come close enough to inherit what we carried back from the desert. The integration continues, one atom at a time.